And shalom, welcome to Shmu's Views Torah Observant Judaism. I am your host, Shmuel ben Shlomi. Today, I want to talk about a subject that has been used for generations to scare people, to frighten them into obedience to one narrative or another, be it religious, political, whatever. And that is the whole concept of hell. Before we get started, I want to encourage you to hit the subscribe button, hit the like button for this video, and the notification bell so you will be notified whenever we put out some new videos. Quickly, you can find us on our website, Shmu's Views Torah Observant Judaism, our Shmu's Views Locals community. We can be found on various social media outlets, platforms, and all of that will be posted below. In 1969, singer-songwriter Edwin Starr came out with a hit song titled War. Many of you probably remember it. It said, "Woo, war, what is it good for? Absolutely nothing." Well, the concept of hell could have easily replaced the word war in that song. Before continuing with this topic of hell, I must make it known, a full disclosure, that I personally believe in a type of heaven and hell, but perhaps not in the way many will think of it. My intention in this video is not to convince anyone to believe or disbelieve in heaven or a hell. However, to be able to intelligently discuss a thing, it is vital to know something of that thing's inception and evolution over time. According to the Zohar, the Jewish foundational masterpiece of Kabbalah, it indicates there may be transitional stages of what has become generically called hell. However, this does not necessitate them to be literal, physical places. More than that, from a historical context, the evolution of hell is clearly defined and more closely relates to a state of being, a frame of mental and spiritual reference. However, since the Torah doesn't spend a great deal of time on the subject other than when necessary to further its teachings, I will not be fixed or dogmatic about this subject. That said, however, that should not prevent us from learning as much as it is possible if it will help us to understand the great mercies of Hashem to his people. Even the Tanakh, which most people in the Occident use as a basis for their belief in hell, was not created in a vacuum. The authors and characters of the various holy texts all brought to the table their concept of a hell that was prevalent in their day. When we look at hell's beginnings and how it evolved over generation to generation, it is quite fascinating. What is more interesting is that we can go back to a time when hell wasn't even a factor. So let's get this show on the road. Some may be shocked to find that the very founding father of our people, Abraham, did not know of, believe in, or even could conceive of such a place that many religions across the globe view as an eternal place of unimaginable eternal torments. The ideal of hell has a beginning in the annals of time, and over the centuries it has evolved into this magnificent, foreboding dwelling place that many have come to accept and cringingly fear today. Let's look at a brief outline of hell's origins, followed by some interesting and hopefully helpful reference material for those who wish to really study the subject for themselves. Now, this reference material will be posted in the description of this video down below. It should be noted that while the Tanakh touches on the afterlife, it doesn't dwell heavily upon it. Its goal is to equip the soul for life in this physical body in the here and now. And while it may refer to a place for the dead as a reality, it doesn't elaborate much on its particulars. So let's look at a quick outline before continuing. First, we have what I call the prehistory era, and that's beginning with creation about 4.5 billion years ago, at least the creation of Earth, circa and going up to about 4000 BCE, before the Common Era. In other words, from Adam to Abraham, from Adam to Abraham. There existed the idea of the myth of eternal return at that time, the miracle of continuous rising based loosely on humankind's witnessing of the rising and falling of the sun, the waning and waxing of the moon, the monthly and yearly cycles, as well as organic birth, death, and the concept of rebirth by looking at nature. Second, we come to what is known as the post-deluge era, the period right before the flood, starting 4000 BCE, and then a little earlier. 4000 to 1800 BCE, excuse me. Learning from agriculture with sowing and harvesting, the practice of the sacrifice of god kings and their eternal journey on the river of life and return to reign in a new body. Examples of this can be found in the cuneiform writings describing Sumerian god-king annual and sacrificial seasonal sacrifices, dating all the way from Nimrod, also known as Gilgamesh, to the Tower of Babel incident. Over in the Nile region in Egypt, with of course it wasn't called Egypt that far back, but in the Nile region with the rivers' annual rising and falling, it led to the concept of Egyptian pharaohs being god kings entombed for their afterlife journey, only to reemerge in new earthly form after meeting the tests of hell. So for them, hell was not a place of condemnation or damnation. It was a place of testing. The prevalent practice of feeding the entombed dead developed to ensure they would have what they needed in the land of the dead, be it paradise or hell. Deuteronomy 26:14, as it relates to this practice to the mourning period after the death of a relative, states, "I have not eaten of it in my intense mourning. I did not consume it in a state of contamination, and I did not give it for the needs of the dead. I have hearkened to the voice of Hashem, my God. I have acted according to everything you commanded me." Then next we have the early biblical period, the tribal period, at least for Israel, from about 1800 to 1250 BCE, from the patriarchs to Joshua and the family cave tomb as described in Genesis 25:8, 35:29, 49:29 through 31, and verse 33, and Numbers 27:13. I hope you're jotting these down, because I would love for you to look them up. I don't want to spend the time going over each and every verse in full detail, so jot these verses down and then go check them out for yourself. In the early biblical period, throughout the Middle and Near East, death meant one thing: entering the ancestral realm of the family tomb, so that upon departing from this world, the deceased would be gathered to his people. We now enter the pre-exilic period and the beginning of the nation of Israel, circa 1250 to 586 BCE, before the Common Era, from Joshua to the Babylonian exile. During this important period, new and different ideas about the afterlife began to slowly develop. Now, these changes did not take place immediately, but in successive increments over the next 700 years or so. The tribe has been replaced by the nation, causing a paradigm shift in the political, social, and religious consciousness of the nation. This shift greatly affected the views of death and what takes place in the afterlife. The concept of Sheol grew over that period and became known as grave of the ancestors, as is revealed in Genesis 42:38, Isaiah 5:15, Isaiah 14:11, and Psalm 141:7. Now, the idea of Sheol was borrowed from the Mesopotamian/Chaldean concept called Aralu, A-R-A-L-U, Aralu, which means a place of the dead, located beneath the earth. Now, Job's description of Sheol, found in Job 10:21 through 22, is identical to the Babylonian Kur Nugra, land of no return. Job lived in that part of Mesopotamia known as the city of Uz, just a few kilometers from Abraham's hometown of Ur. This idea was later adopted by the Greek culture to represent Hades, which in turn eventually was expanded by the Christian religion to resemble a place of eternal suffering envisioned in the classic piece of literature known as Dante's Inferno. We now move into the post-exilic period, represented by to scatter and regather, circa 587 to 200 BCE, from the Babylonian exile to the Maccabean revolt against the Seleucid rule in Eretz Israel. The scattering of the 10 northern tribes by the Assyrians, and decades later, the loss of the nation's 2 southern tribes of Judah and Benjamin to Babylonian captivity, put a sword through the heart of our beloved Jewish nation that, quite honestly, if we're going to be honest with ourselves, we haven't fully recovered from to this very day. The heart of the nation was no more. Its central focus, the Temple of Solomon, was rubble. A new shift in the thinking among the people and the prophets began to take place. With this shift, Sheol slowly took on new responsibilities in successive stages. Sheol now moves from a place of rest, or a grave for the ancestral dead, to the realm of retribution. To those so far from their promised inheritance, Sheol now becomes the place of chastisement for Israel's enemies, foreshadowed by Isaiah 14:9 and 15, and espoused by Ezekiel 32:18. Not only a place for kings and nations that come against the house of Israel, but it also takes on a more personal place for an individual's responsibility and retribution, be they Jew or Gentile, non-Jew, as expressed in Jeremiah 31:20 through 30, and Ezekiel 18, verses 4 and 20. Over the next period, our next period is called the post-biblical and pre-Christian era, circa 200 BCE to approximately 2 CE, or the Common Era. During this period, Greek influence throughout the Middle and Near East was inclusive. Few escaped this Hellenistic intrusion. The Septuagint, the Apocrypha, the Pseudepigrapha are the Hellenized Jewish writings of this period. It is these writings, along with the teachings of the later Essenes, Sadducees, and Pharisees, that impacted greater than any other factor the newly developing concepts of hell that would be fully entrenched by the mid-1st century CE. It is from this period that the idea developed that Sheol was divided into 2 distinct sections, aside for the wicked dead called Gehenna or Gehenom, and aside for the righteous dead called Gan Eden or the Garden of Eden, also known as Abraham's bosom, which I mentioned. So one of the reasons why I'm going over this, because I mentioned briefly Abraham's bosom in my video on the life and times of Abraham, on the 3rd video about tales of myths and legends surrounding Abraham. Well, this was one of those things that happened in this time period where this division in Sheol, part of it was called the Garden of Eden, also known as Abraham's bosom. Now, Gehenna and Sheol were used interchangeably in the early apocryphal period. However, by the end of this period, Sheol had all but disappeared. Traditions about Gehenna evolved and eventually took on mythical proportions in later rabbinic and Kabbalistic writings. Over time, it developed into a place of torment, filled with ravenous wolves, unquenchable flame and thirst, maggots, cankerworms, and a continuous darkness of sleepless agony. By the historical time of the Roman occupation of Jerusalem, this was the predominant view held by most religious Jews. The one difference that has developed since then between the Jewish, Christian, and Muslim concept of hell was this. In Jewish tradition, while hell is an eternal state, it is not the eternal abode for the individual. The predominant view held in pre-rabbinic and rabbinic Judaism is that Gehenna, or hell, is not punitive in nature, but its primary purpose is to serve as a place of purgation, atonement, and purification. Picture a place in which the tares are burnt off so only the pure grain can emerge, or the soul is being refined in the fires of purity, so that what emerges on the other side is a pure, refined silver fit for the king of creation. According to the Talmud in Midrash Pesikta, Rabbati 53:2, after going down to Gehenna and receiving the punishment due him, the sinner is forgiven for all of his iniquities, and like an arrow from the bow is flung from Gehenna. Then, according to Exodus Rabbah 7:4, the soul, having been sufficiently purified, is able to enter the beautiful realm of Gan Eden. These were the common views held by most religious Jews and early Christian Jews until approximately 135 CE. There was always division between these two disparate groups, but at that time, in around 135 CE, a great division occurred, aided by the final Roman destruction of Shimon bar Kokhba revolt. Rabbinic Judaism and Christianity went their very separate and divergent ways at that point. With the massive influx of non-Jewish thought coming into the Christian movement, later called the Church, by the 4th century CE, the original Jewish followers of Jesus as their Messiah, along with their influence, had died out and was completely replaced by Pauline theology and further developed by Augustine's theology as reflected in his infamous eschatological work entitled City of God. He and Paul's concept of hell as an eternal place of suffering, as well as all his other themes, have influenced Western Christian thought to this very day. This idea of hell finally reached its zenith in the 13th century CE when the Roman Catholic poet Dante, in his literary masterpiece of fantasy titled The Divine Comedy, mapped out in a very picturesque graphic display the images of hell. What few realize is just how great these two works of antiquity have colored today's concept of hell. So let's sum up. Hell, as it has come to be known today, evolved slowly over the last 6,000 years. It originally was nothing more than a burial place or family tomb for a nomadic tribal peoples that was totally devoid of any concept of judgment, retribution, and was amoral in its view. It then developed into a place for the nation's dead, evolving later as a place of retribution for the nation's enemies. This eventually led to a place of retribution for all individuals. Over time, for Jews, it became the place of retribution, purgation, atonement, and purification, a place to leave for the joys of Gan Eden after a period not to exceed 12 earth months. For the Christian and Muslim, it became a place for the unbelieving throng and infidel to be tortured for all eternity with unimaginable torments. Hell has been a masterful tool used by those who wish to maintain power over the masses. If you are taught from birth to believe that if you don't walk in a certain way and as designated by those in control, then what awaits you is an eternity of flame, torment, eternal eating by worms and maggots. And for those who in those days could not even read and were totally dependent on what they heard from those in power as being truthful, hell was a great, great control mechanism. Thankfully, for many people, those days of control have come to an end. There are still those caught in it, trapped in it, believe in it beyond any doubt. And for them, I can only pray that one day, maybe a video like this may help them see the evolution of hell, how it started, how the whole concept started, and how it changed over millennia to become what many think it is today. I would encourage you to look down in the description below, click the Show More button so you can get a list of the references that were used for this video. Also, the links to our website, to our locals community, Shmu's Views Locals community, and links to all of the social media platforms that we can be found on are also listed down below. So until next time, I wish you all a great day and hope that you walk with Hashem. Shalom.